Well, this year's theme is Imagine. And I'm excited to share with you why God imparted this word into my heart for 2021 and what this theme means. But I was thinking back to times I imagined things as a kid. I remember distinctly growing up in Alaska when they were redoing the road. Now, this was a big deal in Alaska. Like here, we redo the road and we move on. But in Alaska, you redo the road and the whole town stops. We pull out our lawn chairs. We take notice. We sit and watch. We bring out the lemonade. I made a killing on my lemonade stand that summer, I gotta tell you. And my favorite thing about the roads being redone was they had to actually do work underneath the streets of Sterling, and they had to put in new rainwater tunnels. Now, if you've ever seen these gigantic rainwater runoff tunnels, they're huge, they're enormous. As an 8-year-old kid, it was heaven. It was like the coolest thing in the world. Now, as a kid, I wasn't allowed to watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because they were evil and they were performing witchcraft or sorcery of some kind. And so I was not allowed to watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But I had seen the backpacks, and I'd seen the t-shirts, and I knew there were these turtles that lived underground in these tunnels, and I wanted to be one of the turtles. And there was 3 turtles, and I have 2 sisters, and so the 3 of us would play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles under the tunnels all summer long. Now, I didn't have television, so I didn't know what their names were, so we made up names. I was Thrasher. And to this day, I still don't know what all of their names are, but I was Thrasher. And I was the best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. And I had so much fun with my imagination and pretending what it was that I could be. The possibilities were endless as a child. And one of the things that's fascinating, I teach a course about child and adolescent psychology. And in child psychology, in that course, one of the things that we learn is that imagination is key to a child's development. In fact, a child who does not imagine is cause for concern. If we see a child not imagining things, that is more concerning than when a child actually has an imaginary friend. Imagination leads to appropriate social development. It produces empathy as we imagine ourselves in somebody else's shoes. It creates confidence and self-esteem through imagining that we're someone bigger and greater and older than what we really are. Imagining is central to our development. And yet there's things that we experience through life that cap our imagination, inhibit our imagination, stop us from imagining, when in reality we were all born to imagine. Every single one of us was given the gift of an imagination coming straight from God, straight from heaven itself. I love Einstein says it this way. He says, the true mark of intelligence is imagination, not knowledge. And yet we pursue knowledge and we very rarely pursue imagination. Einstein, one of the greatest thinkers of all time, says that it is actually imagination that is the mark of intelligence. And I want to tell us a story today. It's a story of Deborah. It's one of my favorite stories in Scripture because Deborah did what no one could have imagined being done. Deborah did what at that point and that time was unheard of in human history. Deborah, at this point in Judges, before I read it, the people of Israel had repeatedly run into issues. This is just tragic human history because the people of Israel are led out of slavery, and every single time they get to a good place, they fall. They lose sight of the freedom from captivity that God had brought them, and they begin to sin. And so up until this point, Moses, the deliverer, has led them into their promised land. Joshua followed Moses, led them into the promised land, and at this point, Joshua passes away. And this is before kings are introduced. We have a season of judges. And judges are the individuals in Scripture who ruled over the land. They were individuals who made decisions over civil disputes and matters of land and issues between rivaling individuals. Judges were essential to the time. And there was about 200 years where judges were making all of the decisions for people. Deborah was one of those judges. Judges were not elected by people. They were not appointed by people. They were not appointed by a king, which would later happen when King David is introduced and King David would anoint the next king. What happened here was God appointed the judges. And Deborah is introduced as the first and only female judge in all of human history. Deborah is introduced at a time where women actually were not able to do anything that a man was deemed fit to do. This was a time when women, her testimony in a court of law was only validated by her husband. So if a woman would say, I was raped in court, a man, her husband, had to say, yes, she was raped. Her testimony meant nothing without a man actually validating her testimony. And yet, God introduces a woman to lead these messy people of Israel who sinned again and again and again, and he brings Deborah onto the scene to lead. Judges chapter 4, in verses 4 through 10, it says, Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, so many fun names, from Kadesh and Naphtali, and said to him, The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and troops to Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Barak, who's the general, he's in charge of her army, said to her, If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Certainly I will go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, where Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with them. Let's pray. Jesus, I pray that tonight you would speak to us. That God, you would open our minds to the possibilities of who you've made us to be, of who you've created us to be. God, I pray that the words that are of me would fall to the floor. The words that are of you, Jesus, would pierce our hearts. In your name, we all pray. Amen. Amen. I remember distinctly playing dress up. How many played dress up in here? Yes. Nowadays, they have like really beautiful dresses, and maybe they even did back then, but my family was quite poor. And so my dad, in order for us to play dress up, went to Goodwill, grabbed a big box, and filled it to the brim with random dresses, gloves, necklaces, hats, all kinds of things that had been worn who knows how many times and who knows how many germs inhabited them. But when he brought them home to us, we thought we had hit the jackpot. As soon as I put on that white smock, I was a surgeon in the hospital making life and death decisions. As soon as I grabbed that briefcase, I was a lawyer in the court of law, making decisions that would send him to the slammer for life. As soon as I put on those gloves, I was in a ballroom, dancing in the White House. Imagination was a beautiful and wonderful thing. And Deborah, I imagine, back in the day, wouldn't have even been able to dream of the possibility of one day being a judge and a ruler of the land, because she had never seen this being a possibility. So here's my point. This is what I want us to grasp tonight, is that just because I can't see it doesn't mean I can't be it. Just because I can't see it doesn't mean I can't be it. You see, as kids, we play dress up. As kids, we learn that anything is possible. If you had asked me at 8 years old, when I was a teenage mutant ninja turtle named Thrasher, I believed that I would save Sterling from the ratchet hands of whoever's trying to take the last frontier in Alaska. And then I would believe that that night I could be in a ball gown in the White House dancing as President of the United States of America. I was a teenage mutant ninja turtle by day and president by night. I believed it was possible. And yet something happens as we begin to go through life that inhibits our imagination. We start out thinking that anything is possible, and things begin to happen to us, or we do things that begin to inhibit the idea that anything is possible and that the sky is the limit. We begin to have these situations lull us to sleep. We fall asleep on our call. We fall asleep on what we're created to do. We fall asleep on what it is that we once dreamed being possible, and instead we begin going through the life accomplishing the bare minimum. Have you ever done the bare minimum? And don't you feel bad about it afterward? I mean, Maria says, I don't. I felt so guilty this one time as a new mom when I did the bare minimum. My kids started preschool this last year, and I was a proud mom bringing my kids to preschool when the week of Halloween approached. Now, Halloween is my birthday. I'm not anti-Halloween. I enjoy Halloween. I like Halloween. But the week of Halloween this year, my son got sick. And when your child gets sick, you become a little bit preoccupied with that child. And so I became very distracted from the announcements of the Halloween parade at preschool. I paid very little attention because I was just trying to help my son get well. And doing the bare minimum, I decided that the Halloween parade really wasn't a big priority. And of course, it's a Christian preschool. How many kids are really going to dress up for Halloween? When I walked up, my husband dropped off my daughter, and take a look at the first image that we see as we approach the preschool. Now, this is a Christian preschool doing the bare minimum. When every kid, show the next picture, every kid, and there's my daughter. Show that next picture. My daughter in the Halloween parade wearing shorts and a t-shirt with her pigtails as every single other child is dressed to the nines. I mean, we had lions and tigers and bears, oh my. We had doctors and princesses, and one kid was in like an entire fire truck. I don't even know how he did that. And my daughter in the Halloween parade, the only child in the entire preschool who was not dressed up. The bare minimum. Here's what we begin to figure out about life, is that the bare minimum doesn't suffice. The bare minimum leaves us with regret. The bare minimum leaves us with worry. The bare minimum leaves us feeling as though we should have, could have, and would have done better if we actually believed in the possibilities. And I want to encourage us tonight that we cannot fall asleep on our call. There is a world that needs us to live wide awake. Our families need us awake. Our workplaces need us awake. Our church needs us awake. Our small groups need us awake. Our friends need us awake. We have to live fully wide awake. We cannot fall asleep on the call of God on our lives, nor can we do the bare minimum. The dreams that God spoke to you when you were once small are still a possibility this day, tomorrow, and forevermore. I think of our imaginations as a big, giant movie screen, that as soon as I begin to think of something, I begin to project it onto a movie screen in my mind, a movie screen of life. Sometimes they are negative projections, sometimes they are positive projections. I decide. I get to control the thoughts that I think. I don't get led by my emotions. I lead my emotions. I'm not led by my thoughts. I lead my thoughts. And in this movie screen, sometimes I feel like we project things the moment something negative pops up, and we follow it like a rabbit down a winding hole. And when all of a sudden what started as a headache, we have projected a brain tumor onto our lives. What starts as just a stomach ache all of a sudden is open heart surgery. What began as a stomach has now inhabited our heart. And our minds allow us to race out of control. And I want to encourage us tonight that those projections that we are following like a rabbit down a hole, we get to control. We get to dictate the projection that we play again and again in our minds. And yet, so often we run a rerun of the exact same thing again and again and again. That moment we felt rejected by that friend, we rerun again and again and again. Oh, they didn't say hi to me right when I walked in. I'm rejected. I'm going to go home and sit at home and have a pity party for myself because nobody likes me. I guess I may as well eat some worms. We tend to race and here's what happens. As we have this negative thought, we project it onto our mind of a movie screen called life. We grab a seat, we grab a blanket, we pull up the popcorn, and we begin just to eat and allow this mind to race out of control. When that's not how we are called to live, it's not how we are created to live, it's not how we're supposed to navigate this movie called life. We have to change the channel. Change the channel. When you begin to feel like you are being conquered by fear, you change the channel to I fear nothing. When you begin to feel sorry for yourself, you change the channel and remind yourself that you are more than a conqueror, that God has plans to prosper you, not to harm you, that God has good things in store for you. And yet we pull up the chair and we pull out the popcorn and we try to join some people with us for our little pity party. And we try to feel sorry for ourselves. And so often this is what happens. We begin with an imagination. It doesn't work out exactly how we wanted it to. And we begin to rehearse the negative things again and again and again. And we decide that this is our movie. We write the end when God's not finished. This is a comma where you have placed a period. I get that negative things happened. I get that that bad situation occurred. I get that you want to feel down in the dumps. That is a comma, and you keep going because until God writes the end, He's not done. So we have to be willing to keep going. And here's how I think of our imagination. I think of it like an incubation place. I think of it as an incubation place because everything begins in our minds. That feeling of rejection that we rehearse again and again and again starts in our mind. And sure, maybe somebody didn't say hi that one moment, but maybe they were just in a hurry to get somewhere. They weren't trying to reject you. They were just busy trying to get to preschool to pick up their kid who wasn't dressed up for the Halloween parade. And yet we rehearse these negative things. I think of our imagination as an incubation place. I want to show a picture of my son who was in an incubator when he was first born. That's my husband looking over our son who, for a couple of weeks after he was born, lived his life in this tiny little plastic box. And here's what an incubator does. Science created this incubator to protect him from infection. You see, that top part comes down, closes in around him, and protects him from every single germ that would want to make his way into my son's body. That incubator protects him. That incubator regulates the environment within which my son lives. That environment is regulated so much to the point it determines how much humidity and what temperature my son should enjoy while he's in that incubator. It also cultivates growth. You see, all those things that he's hooked up to actually help him grow and make sure that he's growing stronger and bigger and better. And the three things that I've learned about imagination as a place of incubation are that our imagination protects our path. You see, just like justice is protected from germs, our imagination actually is able to protect our path. Our imagination is able to regulate our pace and our imagination is able to cultivate perseverance in us. The first one I mentioned is that our imagination protects our path. I want to share with us back in verse 4, it says, "Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided." You see, Deborah was a person who knew her path. There was many paths that she could have taken. In fact, at that time and place, there was many paths she should have taken as a woman. And yet, because of what she was doing, she knew her path was secure in Jesus. I remember Andrew made mention of this, that when Andrew and I decided to plant Grace City, that was the exact moment that I had an opportunity for a big promotion at the university. You see, I find that sometimes if God can't slow you down, he'll speed you up. And I found in that moment, I had to make a choice between planting the church and doing this with my husband, or taking a big promotion, a big pay raise, a big opportunity that was associated with it. At that time, I was running our debate team, and I was working as an associate dean to the College of Honors, and I was offered the opportunity to become the dean of the College of Honors. Now, at this young of an age, that is a huge opportunity. And I remember talking to Andrew about this, and I'll never forget exactly where we were driving down the road. And I began waging this battle in my mind of, do I pursue this really good, amazing opportunity that for me, myself, I really want to do? Or do I do this thing with my husband that I always imagined being possible with him? And in that moment, he said, I want this to be a we thing, not a me thing. And I made a decision, because I knew the path that God had marked out for me, to deny the promotion and protect the path of my imagination. You see, if I had taken that opportunity, Echo Conference more than likely wouldn't even exist. If I had taken that opportunity, my husband and I wouldn't be able to pastor together. If I had taken that opportunity, sisterhood wouldn't exist. If I had taken that opportunity, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And it's not that it was even a bad thing. It was a good thing. But sometimes good things aren't God things. And we have to make decisions to protect the path of the God thing. Even when it's a good thing and it's appealing and it's calling us and we're desiring to go that direction, we have to protect the path of the imagination that God has marked our hearts with. And I want to share with us a warning for in this incubation phase. You see, my son in that incubator was so protected from the outside world that because of how young he was, because of the infant status, we protected him to the place that no one was allowed to visit him outside of us, that no one was allowed to interfere with him outside of nurses and doctors and us, that we protected him to the place that nothing could hinder that teeny tiny little baby as he was growing. Sometimes the dreams and the imaginations that God speaks to us, we need to leave them in the incubator for a time. We need to be mindful before we share these things with other people, because they can unintentionally introduce germs into our incubator that we're not ready for. They can introduce things that our incubator cannot withstand because we're not strong enough, we're not big enough, and we're not ready enough. My son today, if you saw him, he's a tank. He's in the 99th percentile. That means he's bigger than 99% of 2-year-olds in the world. As a little boy born almost a month early who spent the first couple weeks of his life in the NICU, it makes no sense. It doesn't make sense in God's kingdom. We have to protect the visions that God's giving us in these early stages. You see, Deborah knew her path. She was leading in a man's world, and yet she, with all the confidence in the world, knew exactly what she was called to do. Deborah was known as a poet, as a songwriter, as a military leader. So Barak, who was her general, she actually oversaw him. So she ran the entire army. She was a mother and a judge, the leader of the nation of Israel. There was no rebellion that was ever known to come up against her because she was marked for her openness, for her fairness, and for her refusal to show partiality in any of the judgments that she made. She was such an extraordinary woman because she knew exactly what her path was. She protected that path at any cost, and she wasn't daunted by her call. She had no example that had gone before her. She had no one to show her what it looked like to be a woman leader at that time, and it did not matter because she had God to show her the way. She had God showing her how to do it. God marked out for her the path that she was to take, and I imagine all the little girls in Israel that must have watched her and saw all of a sudden that what a woman made possible at that time was suddenly possible for every little girl in all of Israel to begin dreaming a dream that they had never dreamed before. Just because she couldn't see it didn't mean she couldn't do it. The second thing I observe in that incubation phase is that our imagination regulates our pace. Our imagination regulates our pace. In verse 6, she sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, and from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands." Deborah knew the pace she had marked out because she was walking so intimately and acquainted so well with God's voice that nothing could persuade her otherwise. Now, it's important to know that the army that she was going up against had 100,000 men in the army. And what she tells Barak here is, I want you to take 10,000 men, and I want you to approach at Mount Tabor 100,000 men. And not only are they outnumbered 10 times the amount, but this is in the Iron Age. We had just left the Bronze Age and we're entering the Iron Age. And in the Iron Age, these men of this army had created 900 chariots of iron. So not only was she approaching this army with only 10,000 men, up against 100,000, she was approaching with lowly little swords as they were operating with 900 chariots. To liken it to today's fight, imagine going into a battle with a slingshot and the guy's got Uzis in front of you, machine guns at your back, and all you've got is a slingshot. And yet, Deborah, because she knew her path, didn't allow anything to dissuade her. She had imagined her victory before she even obtained the victory. She knew victory was coming because impossible only means it hasn't been done yet. Impossible means it only hasn't been done yet. With faith, nothing is impossible. I think of it like this. I don't know if you've ever looked at the spelling of impossible, but it's actually spelled I'm possible. Impossible is actually saying I'm possible. So no matter what it is that you are facing, no matter how many times you say that's impossible, what you're really declaring is I'm possible. It doesn't matter what my family says. It doesn't matter what that person says. It doesn't matter what my education says or what my qualification says. I'm possible. I remember talking to a mentor, and I remember kind of, complaining about life, and I tend to do this when I get overwhelmed. I get real fun to be around, and I remember talking to my mentor, and I was saying, woe is me. My giant movie projection is so negative, and I was running credits of everything I was angry about and everything I was upset about, and I work 2 full-time jobs, and I have twins, and I'm married, and I can't do this, and I'm so tired. So exhausted. And people kept saying to me, Christina, you can't do what you're doing. You can't keep up this pace. And I remember complaining to my mentor, and she said this: the person who says it cannot be done shouldn't interrupt the person who's doing it. The person who's saying it shouldn't be done shouldn't interrupt the person who's doing it. They're so busy telling We serve a God that makes all things possible. I love our sisterhood because I look to it as a setter for my pace. You see, Deborah looked to people that helped set their pace. And sometimes when my imagination needs some inspiration, I look to my sisterhood. I look to a woman like Stephanie Lewis, who in the midst of going to school full-time, leads a city group every week, works a full-time job, fosters in her free time for a year and a half the same child, and raises 2 kids that she sometimes has the ability to throw the perfect birthday party for. How is that possible? When I start to feel sorry for myself, I just take a look at the Paige Wagners, who as a real estate broker running her own business, doing all of these incredible things, serves helping run our sisterhood, serves helping run Grace City Music alongside of her husband, being a full-time mom and a full-time employee, and all of a sudden I don't feel so sorry for myself. I take a look at the pace of those around me, and I begin to think, what is it I want to be known for? What is it that I want to be accepted as being? And when I start to feel really sorry for myself, I just take a look, not to compare and compete, because that result is defeat, but to help me set a pace that doesn't allow me to slow down. You see, Deborah's pace was different. She dared to dream different, therefore she dared to do different. Her pace was different, and that difference is what made her known for all of mankind to read about to this day. What kind of life do we want to leave? What kind of legacy do we want to be known for? Just because it doesn't make sense doesn't mean it can't be done. The third thing I see here in the incubation phase is our imagination cultivates perseverance. Our imagination cultivates perseverance. Barak said to her in verse 8, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours. For the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." For the first time in all of history, the Lord will deliver into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. See, God has an appointed time for his appointed work. Deborah knew the timing and wasn't afraid of the victory that was immediately going to befall her or the trials that led up to that moment. But sometimes when we don't see the victory right when we want it, we begin to doubt the imagination and the dream that God has placed in our heart. I think of the story of planting a bamboo seed. You see, if you want to grow bamboo, you plant the seed and you create the perfect environment for that bamboo to live in. You make sure it's getting the right amount of water, the right amount of shade, the right amount of sunlight. And if you watch that bamboo, you would begin to be quite disappointed because for a whole year, nothing happens. You keep watering it, you keep feeding it, you keep providing it with enough sunlight and enough shade, and another year passes by and yet nothing happens. And another year, nothing happens. And another year, and nothing happens. 5 years goes by that bamboo seed has been in the ground before we begin to see the bamboo grow. And wouldn't you know, in year 5, that bamboo that you can't even tell is doing anything shoots up 80 feet in 6 weeks. 80 feet in 6 weeks. That dream that God has placed in your heart has been planted in the ground. You just keep watering it. You keep giving it shade. You keep giving it sunlight. You keep trusting that the God that planted that dream in your heart is just getting started. What began as a seedling is going to turn into an 80-foot tall bamboo tree in your life. And you may doubt it. You may be afraid of it. That's why you control the movie screen of life. You don't rehearse negative movies in your mind. You rehearse positive projections over that seed, believing that that thing that God began in you, he will deliver it until its completion. that thing he started in you, he is not done with yet. Deborah trusted in God's timing. And I think sometimes Barak gets a bad rap. He kind of seems like a coward, especially at that time, because he's saying to a woman, I don't want to go unless you're going. We tend to look at him as a coward in how he's saying that, but here's what I know about Barak, is he knew that the presence of God went with Deborah, and he wasn't going to go into a battle with 10,000 men against 100,000 men without the presence of God with him, and that's why he wanted Deborah by his side. And I find that so often our imaginations are under attack. That very thing that I talked about, the dream that we began with, the dream that we had when we were children, we allow those imaginations of what we could be and what we could do to come under attack. Because the devil knows if he can win the battle in your mind, he's won the whole entire war of your life. If he can occupy your mind, he can occupy your life and occupy every decision that you will ever make. If he can win the battle in your mind, you will be so paralyzed that you will not be able to accomplish what it is he's created for you to do. And I want you to hear me tonight when I say this. I have to give permission for my past to occupy my present. I have to give permission for anything in my past to actually infiltrate my present. I have to give permission in my mind, and I have to choose to entertain those thoughts. You see, I find that not only do we allow our imaginations to be attacked, we allow fear to keep us from doing what God's created us to do. We rehearse the movie of fear again and again and again, and we pull up that chair and we grab the blanket and we pop the popcorn and we rehearse fearful things again and again and again. I remember being 16 years old, and I was in Las Vegas on family vacation, where every good family goes that's a pastor. Every pastor's family needs to go to Vegas for family vacation. And I was 16 years old, and we were on family vacation in Las Vegas, and I remember we were walking by this bungee jumping platform, and I remember my dad daring me to go bungee jumping. Now, not only is it strange that a pastor's family is vacationing in Las Vegas, but it's also strange that a dad would dare a daughter to go bungee jumping. But here's what I learned, and this is what my dad knew, is that if he could teach me something then, it would forever affect the trajectory of my life. And I remember this line, the brave may not live long, but at least they've lived. And as I was standing on that platform, I was afraid out of my mind. But as I jumped in that moment of freedom, I made a decision then that has marked me for my entire life. That I may be afraid, but by God, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to do it afraid. I can't tell you how many times I have sat in fear. Tonight alone, I got here and I thought I was going to throw up so profusely that I had to drink sparkling water and go, I had to take deep breaths just to keep the lump in my throat from causing me to vomit all over the room. But I have to do it afraid. The brave may not live long, but at least they've lived. And what is it that we are keeping us from being able to accomplish because of the fear that we are projecting over our minds? What if we chose today that I'm no longer going to be afraid? Today I'm going to stand up. I'm going to accomplish the thing that God has purposed in my heart to do. I'm not going to shrink back. I'm not going to sit down. I'm going to trust that my God is who he says he is, and I'm going to do exactly what he's called me to do. Think of how many dreams are in this room. Think of how different our world could look. Imagine how different our families would look if the women in this room stood up and said, God, I don't have it all together, but by God, I'm going to do it with you. And I'm going to do exactly what you created me to do. And it doesn't matter how afraid I am. It doesn't matter how scared I am. I'm going to trust that the God who went behind me, beside me, is going to go before me. And Deborah must have been afraid, leading in a man's world, the first woman in all of history to lead at that time with only 10,000 men. She went up against 100,000 men, 900 chariots, but she knew exactly what she was called to do and exactly what she was created to do. She knew without any doubt. She had complete and total certainty of exactly what she was created to do. I'm going to invite the team up, and I want to finish with a couple thoughts. You see, Our imagination cultivates perseverance. Our imagination, if permitted to, it cultivates perseverance. And we can see throughout time as Deborah allowed her imagination to protect her path. We'll see as Deborah allows her imagination to cultivate perseverance. We see as it regulates her pace. She allows God to do in her life what only God could do. And I think of my life, my imagination, as being a spiritual womb. I am pregnant with a purpose. And what is it that I'm giving birth to on a daily basis? What is it that I'm choosing to project on my movie screen called life? What is it I'm choosing to be used by God to do? You see, I made mention of it in the opening, but literally, we are sitting amidst an imagination. And what if I had allowed the fear to keep me? What if I had prevented God from doing what he desires to do? This room would not be filled with women amidst a global pandemic, amidst the wildest year that I have seen in my lifetime. What if I had allowed fear to paralyze me? This room wouldn't exist. How many rooms are you supposed to create? Just like this, that wouldn't exist if you didn't step out in faith. You may only have 10,000 in your army, and you may be up against 100,000, but greater is our God who is in us than he who is in this world. Will we trust him? What can you begin imagining today that could become tomorrow's reality? We have to give ourselves permission to dream. We have to give ourselves permission to think bigger than we've ever thought before, to imagine greater than we've ever imagined before. I think back to probably the greatest inspiration of my life and my family is my grandmother. My family is Inupiaq Eskimo, and in Eskimo heritage and tradition, you refer to your grandmother as Ani. And so my grandmother, who we call Ani, had lived her whole life in Eskimo culture, not being educated. See, in Eskimo culture, like Deborah's time, you're good for cooking and cleaning, but there's really no point in educating, because what's the point? So my grandmother never learned to read, never learned to write, and at 53 years old, she got her GED, and she learned to read at 53 years old. There's no age of expiration. There is no limitation. There should be no deviation for the divine revelation that God desires to place onto every single one of our lives. My grandmother set that example at 53 years old, finally learning how to read. I remember when a teacher told me that I would never graduate from high school because Eskimo girls don't graduate from high school. And I remember in that moment coming home, and I remember talking to my mom and asking, like, did you graduate from high school? My mom, who had me as a teenager, didn't graduate from high school. And I remember beginning to think that the limitations that the world has placed upon me are real and true. I once imagined being in the White House, but without a family that's educated, surely I could never do anything. And I watched as my mom went back to school. And when I was in elementary school, I saw as my mom got her GED. I watched as my mom went back to college. She got her bachelor's degree. I saw my mom go on and get a master's in business administration. And I saw my mom go to law school. Think of the generations that are behind you. Think of the people that are watching and paying attention to what you are doing. You never know the course of history you are charting by the decisions that you are making today. Are you limiting your potential? Because when you limit your potential, you're limiting their potential. When you're deciding God's not big enough to use you today, you're deciding God's not big enough to use them tomorrow. There is a whole generation of women that is watching you, that is waiting, that is needing you to stand up and say, God, I'm willing. Lord, I'm able. I may not be educated enough. I may not be brave enough. I may not be good enough, but by God, you're great enough, and I'm going to trust that you're going to do what only you can do with my life. And I want us tonight to people who are battling mental health. As I was praying over this conference, and as I was believing for imaginations to be opened, I began to sense that there have been diagnoses, there have been designations, there have been paths that you have accepted for your life because what a well-meaning doctor has prescribed, you have succumbed to. As somebody who's diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, as somebody who battles depression, as somebody who knows exactly what it feels like to wake up and to not want to live, as somebody who knows exactly what it feels like to live with the heaviness of just wanting the pain to subside, as somebody who knows exactly what it feels like to not want to live, there is a God who has bigger things and greater things in store for you. And it doesn't matter what diagnosis you've received, we serve a God who's greater than any diagnosis that you could ever receive. We serve a God who's bigger, who's better, who's greater, who can do greater things than we could ever ask or imagine. We serve that God. Come on, sing this out, declaring the goodness of our God. Let your praise be bigger than your problems. Come on. Come on, declare it. Let's get loud tonight. Sing it over that problem. Sing it over that situation. Come on. Here's what Ephesians 3:20 says. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. Just because I can't see it doesn't mean I can't do it. I want you to hear me tonight. There are some of us in this room that have received the words that have been spoken over our lives that do not align with Scripture, that do not align with the words that God declares over our life. And I believe in this moment, Jesus wants to break the chains that have bound us, the chains that have limited us, the chains that have kept us, the chains that have prevented us. And I'm going to believe that right now in this moment, as you lift your hands, those chains that once bound are broken in the name of Jesus Christ. That chain of depression is broken. That chain of addiction is broken. That chain of rejection is